Hello guys, welcome back. So today, all right, I think 1.5 months since we started the semester. We are past the first test, right? Couple of assignments, right? So it's been going okay, hopefully. So just so that we just do a very quick recall. So far, what we have done is that we have done some very foundational concepts, right? And that mostly included, talking about vector spaces and the different kinds of subspaces of vector spaces, right? And their properties, their dimension, basis, orthogonality, linearity, right? And uh, linear transformation, and very specifically, what are we going to understand? What are we going to obtain from linear transformations from one vector space to another vector space, which may not be of the same dimension, right? But I mean, from now onwards, I mean, we will restrict our discussion to finite dimensional vector spaces only, right? And we are not going to talk about infinite dimensional vector spaces. So, like finite dimensional vector spaces, right? Okay. We may sometimes digress to vector spaces over complex numbers, or just talk about vector spaces over real numbers whenever it is applicable. If you recall, we have also talked about some relevant applications so far, right? And some very important results such as rationality theorem, orthogonality, linear independence of the eigenvectors, and so on and so forth, right? So, I mean, overall, we have sort of a nice umbrella of an idea, a nice envelope kind of a thing to begin more serious discussions and some, really important insights, right? Because, I mean, I don't get tired of talking about the ineffectiveness of using determinants to understand linear algebra, because I mean it rarely gives us any insight as to why things are happening the way they're happening, right? I mean, in particular, if you recall, there was this, if you recall, in particular, it's a very specific thing that we did in the early days of this class, is that why would something like this, you know why would something like this would give us eigenvalues? And if you recall, it actually boiled down to null spaces, right? Linear independence and invertibility of the linear map G, if you recall, right? Okay. So, and therefore, we also, if you recall that the uh, invertibility, non-invertibility of the linear map actually guarantees that there are eigenvalues to this particular, equation, right? We did that. Okay. I mean, if you simply take a matrix, take determinant, set it equal to 0, it actually doesn't tell you much. However, so now with this, the first 3 chapters of Axler, so let me also mention the first 3 chapters of Axler, right? Right, chapters 1 to 3. We are done with this, right? Okay, and then there is a very small unit. I would not call it a chapter; it's a small module where he talks about polynomials, and that's where I'm going to, use his slides, because there isn't much to talk about. I'll very quickly go through his slides. If you don't recall some of these very standard things that you are supposed to know from high school algebra or first year college algebra, let me know. I can come back to the whiteboard and work those out. But more important to that is that this is something that pops up now, right? Polynomials. Just pay attention to this, okay? And this is a useful tool. I mean, in the sense that how do you decompose a polynomial? If I give you a quadratic, do you really know the roots of that quadratic equation? If I give you a cubic, do you really know the roots of the cubic equation? And if you do, how is that important in understanding some of the very central themes of linear algebra or foundations of data science? That's one, polynomials. And then I'm also going to talk about invariant subspaces. This is a term that I'm introducing for the first time, right? Of course, it is incumbent upon me to explain what this is, and I will, right? So the invariant subspaces offers really key insights into something. So these are the two things I would like to talk about. Okay. I mean, before I actually want to talk about something that I really want to talk about. Okay. All right. So now my first question is, it's sort of a hunch question. Like, why? I mean, why? I mean, after talking about vector spaces, dimensions, bases, blah, 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 why suddenly in the middle of the semester, or maybe 1.5, after 15, 16 lectures, why am I talking about polynomials, or why I want to discuss polynomials? You guys have any gut feeling? Like, take a guess. If you have to take a guess, can you take a guess? You can speak. Why suddenly now I am talking about polynomials, or I want to discuss polynomials briefly? Any idea, guys? Do you want me to pick you? I mean, I don't want to do that. I can take a, or I can do a dice throw, and then based on what heads show up, I can just call out your name and ask you. And I don't really want to do that. So can you not? Right, right. Yes, Aditya, that's correct. Okay. So the question is, I mean, suddenly the reason why I want to talk about polynomials is because somewhere along the horizon, I actually want to talk about characteristic polynomials. Okay. Which is the chapter 5 of Axler. Okay. So this is really, really important, right, for a bunch of different reasons, right? But one of the reasons why I want to talk about, at least refresh your memory with the basics of polynomials, is because when you have a characteristic polynomial, you would like to know the roots of a characteristic polynomial, right? Now, why do you want to know about the roots of a characteristic polynomial? Or for that matter, any polynomial? Because, yes, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
So for characteristic polynomial, the roots are the eigenvalues, right?
Correct. The characteristic polynomials, the roots are also called the characteristic values or eigenvalues. And also from these eigenvalues, you get a basis of eigenvectors, and then it helps us to decompose. One of the other very relevant application, if you recall, was matrix decomposition. So there are different kinds of matrix decomposition, right? One kind is used in singular value decomposition. The other kind you will see in orthogonal decomposition and Gram-Schmidt, right? And there are lots of other different kinds of decomposition. So that is the reason we want to talk about characteristic polynomials and the conditions under which you can find the roots of a characteristic polynomial, both over the sets of real numbers as well as the sets of complex numbers. That is the reason I want to talk very briefly about characteristic polynomials. Okay, good. So let's go there. Okay, all right. So I mean, my field is either the set of real numbers or complex numbers, And you know that a complex number is defined in the following manner, right? It has like a two-dimensional representation. The horizontal dimension is usually the real number, set of real numbers, and the vertical dimension is usually set of imaginary numbers, right? And this is just the notation that the real part, which is A, is usually called as RE of Z, and the imaginary part, which is, B, is called the IM of Z. Okay, so these are just notational things. And for every complex number can be written as a sum of the real and the imaginary part, right? Very simple. You have seen this in school, right? So for any complex number A plus BI, I can easily figure out the real part and the imaginary part as shown in this particular example, right? And then for every complex number, there is a complex conjugate, right? Okay. Now, so for a complex number A plus BI, its conjugate is A minus BI, and you can represent it in the following fashion. Okay. And you would also want to know what is the argument of a complex number, which is nothing but you take it, the Euclidean norm of it. Okay. All right. And then for this particular example, it shows that the argument of the complex number would be square root of 3 square plus 2 square, which is square root of 13, right? Okay. And then there are some nice properties in complex numbers, pretty easy to follow. Let me know if you want me to work these things out on a whiteboard. I don't think so, because you guys are quite smart, right? So if you take a complex number and add it to its argument, right? I mean, add it to its conjugate, then you recover the real part. If you do the other way around, if you subtract, then you get the imaginary part, right? And if you multiply a complex number with its conjugate, you actually recover the argument of the norm square of that complex number, right? Similarly, there is an additivity rule that follows with respect to the distribution property with respect to addition over the conjugate, right? And that property also holds when you have a product of two complex numbers. Okay. And then it is like the conjugate of a conjugate is the number itself. It's like the dual of a dual problem. If you've seen already, has Ashwin talked about support vector machines yet in the machine learning class?
No, sir.
Not yet. So when he does, he will tell you that the dual of a dual problem is a primal problem. So it's like this. So the conjugate of a conjugate is the number itself, the complex number itself. Okay. All right. So, and then this is easy, right? If you take the argument of the modulus of the real part of the complex number, which is nothing but A, right? And that will be less than equal to square root of A square plus B, right? And the same will apply to the imaginary argument of the complex part, imaginary part, which is modulus of B, right? Which is less than or equal to square root of A square plus B square, right? And then this is also a property that holds, okay? Because you are just looking at the modulus, right? Because the complex conjugate is A minus B, I take the modulus of it, it's going to be square root of A square plus B square, which is nothing but the argument of the complex number itself, okay? And it holds under multiplication, and then the triangle inequality also holds, okay? All right. So these are some nice properties for you to refresh. I'm sure you know all of these properties, right? Now, what is important is polynomials, right? So, I mean, we define a function as a polynomial if there are real or complex coefficients such that you can represent a polynomial in terms of this. Okay, what is interesting in the context of characteristic polynomials when we actually talk about this is that a polynomial represented over a vector space can be written in terms of a linear transformation, which means that I could actually, if we go back to this, is that if I have a representation like this, which is A0 plus A1B, plus AM VM, where M is a positive integer, right? I mean, I do have an equivalent representation in terms of the linear transformation, and that is nothing but And here, this is an operator raised to the power some exponent. I'll come back to this, right? Okay. So the relation should be apparent from here. Okay. All right. So, so the question is this: is that this is a very straightforward result, that if a polynomial is identically zero, then its coefficients are all have to be zero, right? Okay. And the division algorithm or the remainder theorem for the polynomials, I mean, you know that, right? Okay. So you can divide one polynomial by another polynomial, and if you do that, I mean, you will have a remainder which is also a polynomial whose degree will be smaller than the quotient. Okay. Now, this is one of the important things from the perspective of finding out the characteristic values or eigenvalues, is to find a zero of a polynomial. Okay. So you know, this is high school algebra, right? I mean, if f of x is equal to 0 for some value of x, then that value of x is called a zero or a root of that function, right? So in this case, you are representing the polynomial as a function because that's a functional operator. It could be a nonlinear operator or a linear operator. When we come back to characteristic polynomials, we will restrict these operators as linear only. Okay, and therefore, natural extension of this definition is a polynomial can be decomposed into, if you know that such a lambda exists, then a polynomial can be decomposed into a product of the factorization, right? Because you don't know how many such lambdas exist. You don't know whether these lambdas are real and distinct or real and equal, right? So assuming that you don't know any, you don't have any such information, you can represent the polynomial in terms of this. This is a product of one of the factors, which is v minus lambda times another polynomial whose degree will be smaller than the degree of p. Okay, all right. And of course, if a polynomial has degree m, then it is supposed to have m roots, right? M number of roots. Now these roots could be same identical to each other, or they could be distinct. Some of the roots could be different from each other. Some of the roots could be identical to each other. Anyway, right? Okay. All right. But at most, it has m number of distinct roots. It cannot have more than n number of distinct roots if the polynomial is of degree m. Okay, this is interesting. In fact, when I was discovering, I was reading through a slide, and then I went back. How many of you have heard of this man? How many of you have heard of this man? Okay, Mutrish, you have. Okay, who was he? Who was he? You've heard of him, right? But who he really was? Anyone? Okay, so I mean that would be the answer that most people would give, right? Including myself till last night when I was preparing for class. I mean, I didn't know that this guy actually did some work on finding roots of polynomials. In fact, there is one method of finding out roots of a cubic equation, because I mean, in the era of computers, it's now very easy to find the roots of polynomials of any degree, right? But in 11th century, I mean, you had to rely on your analytical skills. So actually, Omar Khayyam actually devised a method of finding roots of a cubic equation. I didn't know this. I mean, did you? How many of you knew this? I guess no one. Okay. Anyway, all right. So, and then there is this fundamental theorem of algebra, which says that every non-constant polynomial, which means polynomials of the form a0 plus a1z plus a2z square, blah blah blah, with complex coefficients, must have a root. All right. And the reason that it must have a root is that this follows from the intermediate value theorem, because a polynomial with differing coefficients, right, with positive and negative signs, must change signs in the sense that it must cross the horizontal axis at least once. So that is why it must have a root. Okay, all right. And if there are polynomials with real coefficients, then these roots come in pairs. Okay, right? So which means that if I have a complex number which is a root of a polynomial, then its conjugate is also a root of the polynomial. That's what it means. Okay, all right. And quadratic polynomials, assuming that the roots are real and distinct, I mean, it will exist if and only if your discriminant value is greater than or equal to 0, right? Okay, you know this. Once again, this is high school algebra, right? Okay, and you can then do a factorization of polynomials, right? Either with a combination of linear and quadratic factors. Okay. Now I'm assuming when you do this, some of these quadratic factors are irreducible, meaning you cannot further reduce it. I mean, you don't have roots over the set of real numbers for some of these quadratics, right? Okay, which is fine. Okay, so this is the basics of polynomials that I just needed you to refresh quickly. So as far as academic interest is concerned, and as far as your evaluation component is concerned, do not expect any question from chapter 4. Okay, all right. I mean, I'm not going to ask anything from chapter 4. Okay, but I mean, it was just necessary to brush up, I mean, what you already knew about polynomials. Okay, because this is used just as a tool to understand better and bigger. Okay, all right. So now let us talk about some of the standard notation, right? Okay, so I would just I mean, what we are going to do at least for the next 3-4 lectures is that we are actually interested in linear transformations like this. Okay, please recall that in the last lecture, we actually did solve a couple of examples. Okay, and in particular, one of those examples was that your dimension of such vector space is just 1. Please also recall that if that is the case, then all vectors belonging to such vector space is of the form alpha v or alpha u. Okay, and alpha is okay. We have done this in the last class, right? I'm going to come back to this. That's the reason I did it in the last class, because we are going to come back to this. Okay, all right. But before that, let's get some of the notations out of our way. Okay, so this is a polynomial. I mean, this is an operator. I mean, I'm going to use, don't get confused. Whenever I say operator, what I mean is a linear transformation from the vector space onto itself. Okay, all right. So when I say operator, when I say T is an operator, what I mean is T is a linear transformation from V to, okay, all right. Okay, and so T to the power m is just an operator raised to the power some number, and this m is an integer. Okay, all right. And what it implies is pretty simple, is that you have this operator and you multiply this operator with itself n number of times. Okay, all right. T to the power 0 is nothing but the identity operator. Okay, and if T is invertible, if T inverse exists, then T to the power minus m is nothing but the operator T inverse, because if T is an operator and T inverse exists, then T inverse is also an operator, right? I mean, it's pretty simple to follow. Okay, all right. And last but not the least, I need to erase something here, but let me see if I can capture this. So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and somewhere let me see if I can squeeze the property number or the notation 4, right? So for a transformation or an operator which is like this, right? I hope you are familiar with this notation by now. And I define a polynomial, right? Like this, okay? And the polynomial is nothing but this polynomial, right? This kind of a polynomial, right? Okay. And then if that is the case, then P of T is also an operator. It's also operator. Meaning what? The P of T, I mean P of T actually goes from the set of polynomials to itself, right? Okay, in such a way that the properties of the linear transformation, the additivity and the scalar multiplicity, are both preserved. Okay, it's simple enough to follow. Okay, all right. And there are a couple of other properties which I also intend to write here, and these are like easy to see. I don't really need to prove this. Okay, you can actually prove this. These follow from an algebraic property, right? Which is if T is in L of V and there are two polynomials PQ defined over the set of polynomials, then their composition, because this is nothing but the composition of operators, right, is this. Okay, all right. Also, there is another property which is the commutative property. It says that if P and Q are two polynomials and they are operators as well, then whichever way you multiply this, like P of T and Q of T, or Q of T and P or T of T, doesn't really matter. They have to be the same. Okay, I mean, easy enough to satisfy this, easy enough to prove this as well. Okay, all right. So let me save this. We are talking about, oh, sorry, 14. I can put it in. Oh, okay. All right. So next, as I said, so we are done with one of the two things that I wanted to talk about, right? Okay. I wouldn't have bothered about polynomials at all hadn't I have a bigger picture in mind, which is to talk about eigenvalues and eigenvectors, right? So the other thing we need to talk about are invariant subspaces. Okay. So let's begin, before I define this, let's begin with an example first on the side. Okay. Let's say I have a differentiation operator. Okay. All right. Okay. So I have a differentiation operator. I have a differentiation. This is a derivative operator, right? I mean, first order derivative. You take a function, you take the derivative, and store it somewhere. I have a differentiation operator D, okay, that belongs to the transformations on the set of polynomials. I think, I mean, I hope you understand this, right? This is nothing but the space of linear transformations where your function is input space is a set of polynomials, your output space is also the set of polynomials. Okay, just like the L of v comma v. Okay, such that I defined the operator in the following manner. That okay, all right. So what is easy to see is that, let's say I take a polynomial p of x, okay, which is 7 minus 3x plus x squared, some polynomial, okay, all right. Then I know that the p of d, because d is an operator, right? I said that d is a linear operator. So that means I have something like this, okay, right? Okay. Now, what I can do is that I apply this on Q, another polynomial, right, which is basically composition of two polynomial operators, right? I will have 7Q minus 3, sorry, 3dq plus d squared q, right? Now, I mean, all I wanted to show is how this, I mean, in terms of if I just define some weird operator, how do you represent this resultant? Now, what is dq, guys? dq is defined as q prime, right? Okay. And what is d square q then? This is nothing but q. Okay. All right. So that you know where your output is getting mapped to. Okay. All right. It's just on the side. The reason why I wanted to show this example is that you have polynomials of different dimensions, right? So let's consider a polynomial. Let's consider, P7R, which means what? A polynomial of degree 7, right? Now, I mean, we can think of this as something like this, right? I mean, by now you are familiar with direct sum decompositions, right? Which means this is a vector space, correct? You all know that. There should be no confusion. So since this is a vector space, we have already seen a vector space can be decomposed into subspaces in such a way that sometimes, this is not true all the time, sometimes that those decomposition of the subspaces can be taken, and you can take a direct sum of those decomposed subspaces and you recover the original vector space. A case in point is a support vector machine. Remember, I told you this example a couple of times, right? So what is important from here is that it is easy to follow that the P4R is a subspace of P7 of R. Okay, all right. So P4 of R is a subspace of P7 of R. So what we are looking at is that I'm looking at operators like this, right? I'm also looking at a U as a subspace of D, and now what I want to look at is this. In other words, I want to look at something like this. Okay? In other words, I want to restrict the transformation to U only. Okay? So I'm restricting it. The question is, what happens if I do that? Okay? All right. Now, going back to the example, it's easy for you to see that this P4R, right? I mean, if you define a differentiation operator on P4 of R, right? See, one problem is this, that I mean, for example, if you sort of define a linear transformation from U to V, right, where one is the subspace of the other, right? I mean, it is not necessary, right? I mean, if you define a transformation from V to U, it is not necessary that you would capture everything, right, onto U, because U is a subspace of V and it could be of smaller dimension compared to V. So you may not have an onto mapping, right? You may not even have one-to-one or things like that. Correct? Okay. But also think about this, that if you can cook up subspaces of a vector space, and you are only interested to look at or understand what is happening on those restricted subspaces, or rather the effect of the linear operator on those restricted subspaces, then such things are possible. It is not possible all the time, but sometimes it could be possible under very special circumstances. And my objective in talking about eigenvalues and eigenvectors is to explore such possibilities, that if such possibilities of restricted linear operators indeed is a reality, then what implications of such possibilities lead us to the existence of eigenvalues and eigenvectors. That is the big picture. Okay. So now if I come back to this particular example, right, I mean, you know that I can suitably define a differentiation operator, which is a linear operator on the vector space P4 of R, right? Okay. And this would be a perfect mapping, right? And this particular mapping is, it perfectly makes sense. This particular mapping makes sense under D. What is D? D is nothing but a differentiation operator. Why? Why does this mapping make sense under this differentiation operator? You have to define special operators, right? Can anyone tell me why does this mapping make sense under the differentiation operator? You can speak. I can't go back to the chat box. See, do you see the problem with this kind of mapping? I mean, you may not have all transformations or all operators satisfying this property. This is a very, very special property, right? I mean, what this says is, when whatever you have here, when you are applying the linear transformation, right, it will go to the, it will come back to the same vector space, right? Okay, all right. So, I mean, when you think of operators such as exponentiation operators, this may not be the case, right? Okay. So, so generally, what we are interested to look at are actually operators like this, which actually take elements of U onto itself. Okay. All right. So, in that context, how does this mapping make sense under the differentiation operator? So in other words, I'll rephrase my question. I will now actually give you the definition of invariance. By the way, have you come across this word invariance? Do you know what it means? In general, from the English language, what is the meaning of this word invariance?
Something that doesn't change.
Correct. Something that doesn't change. Right? Okay. So what is invariant? I mean, what is invariant in the context of advanced mathematics is that for linear operators, like this, right? For linear operators, I'll start writing. For linear operators like this, and U is a subspace of V, U is a subspace of V, right? We say that U is invariant. We say that U is invariant under T if you take a vector U is constant. Okay, all right. So this is the definition of an invariant vector space or an invariant subspace. Okay. Now that you know what is an invariant subspace, which means what? I mean, every element in U is getting mapped onto U itself. Okay. All right. Now, in that context, do you think, I come back to my question, do you think this particular linear operator, I mean, makes sense? So your linear operator is the differentiation operator. You should be able to answer this question now.
So here P4 means the maximum degree has to be 4 or the degree has to be 4?
The maximum, right?
Then it makes sense because differentiation will only decrease the degree and still.
Exactly. However, if I, instead of a differentiation operator, if I use an integral operator, because integral operator, mind you, is also linear. An integral operator is also linear. It will satisfy both properties of linear transformation. But instead of a differentiation operator, if I define an integral operator, will it make sense?
No, sir, it will go out of the 4 degree.
Exactly. Because you take a 4th degree polynomial, a polynomial of maximum degree 4, then its derivative is at most degree 4, right? In fact, it is actually derivative is at most degree 3, which means it is contained within that same vector space. Very good, right? So these are the sort of operators that we are actually interested in. Okay, all right. So it makes sense under differentiation operator, doesn't under integral operator. Okay. All right. So with this, let us sort of come back to the invariant subspaces. So we are now talking about invariant subspaces. Okay. So what does this have to hold for us? So you see how the discussion from now onwards will change. Previously, our discussion was we define a linear transformation from one vector space to another vector space, finite dimensional, but those vector spaces do not have to be the same, right? But now our discussion is restricted to finite dimensional vector spaces onto itself, onto themselves. Okay, all right. Now, in the previous whiteboard, snapshot that we captured, I did mention a couple of examples that we solved in class last time. Do you recall those examples? You don't? We just talked about this in today's class, right? The two solved examples that we did. That any scalar, I mean, of one-dimensional, particularly one-dimensional vector spaces, right? Where, I mean, every vector is of the form alpha times d, right? Okay, all right. And if you have a one-dimensional vector space and a linear operator defined between them, then you can write it as a direct sum of null of t and alpha u. Do you recall? These are the two examples that we solved in class last time. Okay, with a purpose, of course. Okay, now can you think of some trivial examples of an invariant subspace? Some trivial examples.
Every subspace under the identity operator.
Anything else? The really trivial ones. What about the vector space which only contains 0? What about this? T of 0 is 0, right? So you are mapping onto itself, correct? So this is trivial, right? What about the vector space G itself? Right? Okay. The whole of the space, it's like if you're applying the operator on the whole of it, it is definitely going to, get back to itself, right? So these are trivial examples. Any other examples? What do you think about? So this is one. What do you think about null of T? Is it an invariant subspace? If T is a linear operator? T, if U is a null of T, right? So you can think of null of T as capital U, right? Okay, which is a subspace of this vector space V. You know that null of T is a subspace of V, right? Okay. So then your T of U is 0, correct? Okay. So if your T of U is 0, then you can say, can you not say that T of U belongs to null of T? Right? Because 0 null of T by default will contain 0. Okay. So null of T is also an invariant subspace. What about range of T? You think about this, okay? My argument is range of T is also an invariant subspace. All right. But what is important, what is really important is because, I mean, I really want to, drive home this point before I, close the class today, right? I mean, there are usually no easy answers, right? But I mean, at this point, I would like to go back to the example that we talked about in the class last time. Okay, so before that, let me save this. Okay, so my question that I want to pose here is this: how does an operator, right? How does an operator behave? How does he behave on an invariant subspace, on an invariant subspace of V, which has dimension 1? This is the question that I would like to pose. Okay, all right. Because I mean, there is a usefulness of this kind of questions also, if we are able to find the answer, is that vector spaces of dimension 1 are really easy to describe. It's nothing but a non-zero vector, and it's all its scalar components, isn't it? Because it's just a set of real numbers, right? Okay, so we take any non-zero vector U that belongs to V, right? Okay, we take any non-zero vector V, right, and let the vector space U describe all the scalar multiples of U. right? Recall from last class. This is exactly what we have done. Okay, all right. Then, I mean, definitely, U is a one-dimensional subspace of C. U is a one-dimensional subspace of C. What I'm interested is to understand the effects of the linear operator on these one-dimensional subspace. Okay, all right. Now, if this subspace is invariant, right? If U is invariant, right? Okay, if U is invariant under T, right? Then TU, where should TU be? Guys, respond please. If U is invariant under T, where should TU be? Come on. If U is invariant under T, you mean the U vector space, right? Where should TU be?
In U.
Exactly. TU should be in U. Very good. Right? Okay. So if TU is in U and AU is also is in U, what can we say? What can we say? Right? Okay. Now, just for the sake of fun, because A is a scalar, right? So instead of A, right? I mean, let's go back to the standard notation that we usually use. I just assume some scalar lambda. The lambda is some scalar from the field, right? Okay. Then what happens is, what this implies is that the subspace U, the subspace U defined by what? This, right? Defined by star, right? The subspace U defined by star is a one-dimensional subspace, right? Of course, it is invariant, right? One-dimensional subspace of V, right? One-dimensional subspace of V, invariant under T, right? Okay, invariant under T, right? Such that this holds. All right. Where have you seen this before, guys?
Every vector is an eigenvector here.
And what about this lambda?
Eigenvalues.
Correct. Okay, so this is your characteristic equation, isn't it? This is your characteristic equation. Where does it come from? It comes from the concept of invariant subspaces. It doesn't fall off the sky. Okay, all right. Okay, it doesn't fall off the sky, and it also doesn't come by pot banging. Okay, all right. There's a serious scientific discourse behind that, and if you just take the raw determinant approach, you are never going to get it. So this eigenvalue eigenvector equation is a derivative of invariant subspaces. Okay, so this eigenvalue eigenvector equation is a derivative of invariant subspaces of dimension 1. Okay, Now, this is not only this. I mean, we could have multiple eigenvalues, right? Because when you look at the entire vector space, your entire vector space could be multidimensional. Just think about this, right? You could have a vector space of dimension n, and so that you are defining a linear transformation there, right, on that large vector space, and that is not a linear operator. It is a linear transformation, which means that the coefficient matrix induced by the linear transformation is an n by n matrix, right? I mean, so it has n columns, correct? Or the column space contains n linearly independent eigenvectors. So what you are getting here from the one-dimensional subspace is that you're getting one eigenvector and one eigen, right? But so what will happen here is that if I think of so many such one-dimensional invariant subspaces. In other words, if I think of the big picture is this, we are still not ready to actually prove this result, but we will do this later. The big picture is this: if I have a transformation from V to V, where the dimension of V is n, and I have a bunch of invariant subspaces of dimension 1 each. Okay, so here what will happen is, let me just say that the equivalent characteristic equation is nothing but, okay, all right. So this operator t minus lambda I is restricted on, so this implies this operator t minus lambda I is restricted on U. Okay, now just consider U1. So for U1, let's say your associated eigenvalue is lambda 1. For U2, let's say your associated eigenvalue is lambda 2. And for Un, let's say your associated eigenvalue is lambda n, right? So how many such restricted invariant operators we are going to get? We are going to get this many, right? T minus lambda 1 I, right, restricted on U. T minus lambda 2 I, restricted on U2, right? And so on. Similarly, T minus lambda n I, restricted on Un. What am I going to do with all of this? What am I going to do with all of this? Quick question, give me the answer, and then we will conclude today's class. What am I going to do with all of this? So if you are able to decompose your transformation into a full basis matrix, right, of the full basis matrix of eigenvectors, right, then I mean you would expect that each one of this, guys, each one of this, right, U1, U2, Un, these are what? U1 through Un are what? One-dimensional invariant subspaces. And what is the dimension of your vector space V? N, right? So you should be able to write V as a direct sum okay. In other words, if V contains the full basis matrix N, then that full basis matrix of the vector space containing that basis matrix can be decomposed in terms of T minus lambda 1 I restricted on U, direct sum T minus lambda 2 I restricted on U, direct sum, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So what individually you would look at the invariant subspace of individual eigenvalues. Okay. And such invariant subspaces are known as eigenspaces. Okay. All right. So eigen. So instead of looking at the entire corpus of that, basis matrix, or the entire vector space of dimension n, I will be looking at subspaces of dimension 1. Each one of those subspaces will give rise to one eigenvalue. Okay, all right. Of course, there are complexities in this. I am assuming that all the eigenvalues are real and distinct. Okay, not real, but distinct at least, right? However, if actually that is not the case, then some of these, decompositions would be redundant. It's basically repetitions of itself, right? But this is the spirit of eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay, all right. I am sorry to disappoint you if you think that a discussion on eigenvalues and eigenvectors, you will be doing a lot of determinants and solving those by setting those equal to 0. That is not what we are doing. Okay, all right. So that's it. Okay, so this is where we begin the lecture for the next class, which means I'm going to give you a couple of examples on real and imaginary vector spaces, complex vector spaces of the characteristic polynomial, and then I will proceed to some of the other important properties of eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay. So I hope this idea of invariant subspaces and its origin to explain eigenvalues and eigenvectors is clear to you. Okay, so that's it for today.